Heather asked me to specifically look at the PYD's role in this offensive, or or in the countering ISIL campaign, and what it means for the future. And I want to tease out some of the complexities or complications that are arising between the United States and Turkey, and how we could move forward. I'm glad, by the way, that when Kader created the question, it was, what does it mean for the conflict in northern Syria? And the assumption is that there's many conflicts, so that when we're looking at the counter-ISIL campaign in Syria, and not so much as in Iraq, this has been superimposed over many conflicts. So that in Syria, number two, as a state, has become so hyper-fragmented, and the conflicts are so hyper-localized. So what goes on in northern Syria doesn't necessarily affect or directly affect what happens in southern Syria and the campaign elsewhere. So I can't say that this offensive is a game changer or it's going to fundamentally alter the prospects of negotiating Syria, but it will look at a particular part of the country. I want to start with, if we want to understand how we got to where we are with the PYG, and I want to build on what some of Nick said, I want to make some comments on U.S. strategy, my own views, not the government's. We did make a decision a while back that instead of, and this affects how the PYD got to where it is now. We made a decision not to put ground troops in, and this will likely go into the future, that we will rely by, with, and through, as Nick said. That is our strategy, by, with, and through local partners. That is the first part of it, although we may have about 5,000 advisors or so, who are willing. Who would they be? Those groups willing to fight ISIL and radical jihadists first. And I want to add, although Nick said that there was an issue of we couldn't find capable enough partners, there was also another issue. And it was that, remember back at that time, who was willing to prioritize fighting the jihadists first? And we had a problem with some of the other groups because they wanted to fight Assad first. And it was the Kurds that clearly made those two things clear. They wanted to fight the jihadists first and ISIL, and there was nothing else. So that also did help our decision of how we got to where the PYD was. And the second part of that is not only choosing whoever's going to fight ISIL first, but it was enabling those partners. And here's where we got into some of the trouble between us and Turkey. And that meant training, military support, and providing weapons. And so that early effort, to remember in the way back, that very initial dropping of aid to the PYD years back, and that was supposed to be only a one-time off because it had wrangled so much in Turkey, has become something far bigger. And it followed, if you can recall, that failure of our train and equip. When we found out, when there was that session in Congress where, or the testimonies where we only had trained less than a dozen or so. So immediately after that, how did we pick up where we left off? And there was the PYD, create the SDF, and nonetheless to keep this momentum that there would be some kind of success. So I got a little bit more cynicism in the fact that there was an effort and we needed to keep this effort, and the PYD was there to fulfill these two objectives. Fight ISIL first, and be willing to obviously be the United States boots on the ground. And this is what they essentially are, the same way that the Peshmerga are in the South. Now, what has this done? There have been direct consequences, and then there's the unintended consequences. The direct consequences, obviously, as the PYG, PYD, or YPG has earned the reputation of being the most effective force fighting ISIL. You can't get around that. And of course, they have become the U.S. boots on the ground. It's the unintended consequences that I don't think have been fully thought through, the second and third order consequences of the enabling part. And what has that been? It has been not only allowing the PYD, unintentionally or not, to expand its territory, some say about 186%, but it's also enhanced their credibility, semi-legitimized the group, enabled them, motivated them, whatever you may be. Nonetheless, this is where the breakdown is, I think, and what our expectations were and what the opportunities the PYG thought it could take or get away with. But nonetheless, many of the very important alliances that the Kurds had at the local level, let's say the councils in Aleppo, they have broken down because of some of the sense of imbalance, empowerment, whatever it may be, that the Kurds have taken or the PYD has taken over the time. Now, so we've alienated a lot of groups. There's been a recent statement, I don't know if anybody's heard, the disconnect by Jamal Bayek. I was just yesterday, the PKK head in the Kandil Mountains. It was extremely terse, let's be kind, to be saying that the fighting would continue. I think that the PKK or the PYD has a sense of feeling even more enabled, and there is absolutely no incentive whatsoever on either side to negotiate, and obviously Turkey hasn't helped that either. But nonetheless, I think this campaign is also feeding into this sense of empowerment, and not only for the PKK side, the Turkey side, but the PKK. Now, and there's a final point, that is, this has expanded the AOR, the area of operations, not only of Turkey, but of the PKK. So that is to say, or the PYG. You've got this, we've talked about Syria, but we also have northern Iraq. So this is also going on, not just in this one area of a weakened state where borders have become porous, but also in northern Iraq where the PKK can move back and forth. And again, when you're talking about Syria and the AOR, you've got to talk about PKK's movement between Turkey, Iraq, and Syria now in a much more expansive territory. And this is also where I see Turkey can get bogged down. Here's some of the limitations, and here's where I see we, Turkey, the PYD partners, there's been a lot of misperceptions and miscalculations, and where we have erred. The PYD, there's been discussions that this is going to create an important cleavage between the United States and Turkey, and this is going to create, problems. I don't see it that way at all. I think, first of all, our by, with, and through program from the outset was complicated. We knew we had to balance very many different partners, and the other part of it is differentiating between our tactical allies and our strategic allies. Now, perhaps the PYG along the way, or YPG, thought that they were strategic, but I don't see how at any point since the beginning of this, the United States has not indicated anything but the fact that they would be tactical, and that this relationship would be transactional, and that's from the very beginning, even when we talked about providing aid to the Kurds and the YPG, it was always through or trying to assure that Turkey's interests or that we wouldn't overstep in some ways. And let me give you a couple examples. We know about that whole patch incident when some of our special forces were embedded, and it became public that they were wearing some of these YPG patches. Well, that didn't last very long, and they were certainly taken off. There was also other issues about never inviting the PYD to the conferences in Geneva. There was no recognition of the PYD's autonomy project or cantons, and I can go on and on. So we have to be clear as well that along the way the United States has made it clear that this was a tactical alliance, and then and even more importantly, as was noted by our speakers, not only did Vice President Biden make it clear to say you will not get American support if you don't move east of the Euphrates, General Dunford did the same. And lo and behold, they did move. Most of them moved. I'm sure the residual forces. So again, I think the United States has been clear that the Kurds have been tactical. I don't see personally that they're going to move beyond a tactical level. They will try their best. But nonetheless, where the problem has been, where I think we've erred in some part is sending mixed signals. We have not, we've erred to the PYD, we've erred to the Kurds, we've erred to Turkey. We're sending mixed signals by every point along the way. We've said this is tactical, yet we have high-level visits to the YPG. Yet we're not clear about the territorial integrity but until we say it. I mean, I think that we could have been clearer so as not to get into the situation where we had to be. That is, Turkey comes into Jarablus and the United States has to say, now you have to leave. That could have been done. It should have been done about 2 years ago. And we could have avoided some of this. So I think, and I'll get into some of my recommendations, but it's not that it's the lack of clarity that has caused some of the problems and created some of the problems. Not that the United States and Turkey are on the same page, that this is not strategic. And with the Kurds as well. Many of the Kurds I speak to, they know this. They know that the United States is not going to lose this strategic relationship with Turkey. But we need greater clarity on this issue for everybody involved, because what will happen is there will be a backlash against the Kurds, and that wouldn't be helpful either. I want to make a final point about this Raqqa and moving forward. As we look at this idea that the Syrian Kurds, are they essential? Is the PYD essential to the campaign? And my answer at this point is no. They've been extremely important in taking territories that they want to take, and it's the same thing as Iraq. But why would they have interest or effectiveness in areas that are Sunni Arab majority controlled? And so any idea that the Kurds should be used to go into Raqqa, the center of Raqqa, and then move out, I find this folly. And at this point, I'm not talking about 2 years ago, some of these territories have been taken. At this point, the key ISIL strongholds are largely Sunni Arab territories. So you have to engage, whether you like it or not, with the local populations that control these areas. And that would be the same way as saying, let's get a Sunni Arab force to go into these Kurdish territories and think that they can take and hold. We just have to be realistic and deal with the hands that we have, given the fact that our troops aren't going to be on the ground. So no, I don't think the PYD can go into Raqqa, and no, I don't think that they can go save Aleppo and some of these other areas. We need to understand the limitations of our proxies and not over-determine their leverage. This is another problem. So again, I don't see this as a dangerous cleavage. I want to give some suggestions, I would say, policy implications, how we can move forward, and we can have greater discussions on it. Largely looking at us, but I can say some of the issues for Turkey. I think one of our problems is we've been mirror imaging a little bit too much on threat perceptions. If we keep telling Turkey, you have to prioritize ISIL first, and Kurds in Turkey stop fighting. If you understand the trajectory of Turkey over the last nearly 100 years, 45 of which is included in insurgency with the PKK, it's going to be very difficult for Turkey to get involved in ISIL campaign without having it through a PKK lens. It just can't happen. So the more we tell them to stop fighting as this insurgency is going, it's just not going to be effective. And the more that the balance of power locally is shifted, this will actually have repercussions, and it could actually be counterproductive. So we need to take these threat perceptions and strategic priorities of the local partners we're relying on into greater consideration, if this is the path we choose to go. If we decide to put in tens and thousands of ground forces, then that's another calculus. Secondly, and I say this as a follow-up to what General Dunford and Vice President Biden did the other day, and the immediate effects, was to continue to reaffirm the parameters of our support to our local partners. If we're going to support, we're not going to support you up to these territories. Don't give them any indication or any encouragement to move into areas that in fact may be to their disadvantage and that they can't hold. Is the United States going to be the Air Force for these groups for a long time and to hold these territories? I don't think so. Third, I think that we should refrain from using words like federalism, ethno-sectarian partition of Syria when we're looking at, political solutions afterwards. How do we not antagonize local groups? Syria is very hyper-fragmented and hyper-localized. I don't see, it didn't work in Iraq, by the way. We heard this for decades, a Kurd, Sunni, Shia region, and this is just absolutely not reflective of realities on the ground. We can talk about decentralized administration, ways in which different localities can gain greater autonomy or self-governance, but this is one way to, again, antagonize the local partners that we need to move forward with ISIS. How do you lessen the fears of Kurdish empowerment? As we've agreed, there has been balance of power shifts, and the fact of the matter is the Kurdish groups have gained control of some areas. It's not the fact that they've gained control so much, it's the idea that how do you make sure that Turkey or other Sunni Arab groups are less threatened by this? The idea that you will have some kind of Kurdish entity on your border that isn't necessarily a threat, because right now it is. It is because the PYD, the more territory the PYD takes, the more it's reliant on the PKK as a force to hold these territories, and the PKK now needs the PYD to legitimize them. So at this point, I can't see the two of them ever be extracted for the near future. We could be working with Turkey to enhance border security. We've all agreed one of the unintended consequences of this incursion was the fact that there's a lot of people who are committed to the territorial integrity of Syria, and even the Kurds. I don't think there is not one regional actor who wants to see Syria break up. There's a reordering of borders inside the state. So affirming this shared strategic end state, that Syria, as weakened as it is, the borders stay intact, and we worked from there. And finally, I want to make a point about I can't even say the word post-war stabilization. Let's just say stabilizing areas where certain groups have been expelled. Turkey, if you look at a border, this happened in the 90s when we were working Operation Provide Comfort in northern Iraq. It couldn't happen without the border being opened with Turkey. It can't happen. And the border between North Syria and the Kurds and Turkey is even larger than the Iraqi Kurds, the border with the Iraqi Kurds and Turkey. So how do you make it in Turkey's interest, and the Kurds' interest, by the way? Many I've talked to know that they can't move forward without good relations with Turkey and their Arab partners. How do you make this in both groups' interests without feeling threatened that Turkey is not a threat? And I do think right now, nationalist politics aside, that these groups need their areas reconstructed. They want electricity, they want jobs, and they want business. And there is business going on, by the way, between these two groups. So these are some of the things I think that how we can move forward, and I'd be glad to continue this discussion in a Q&A. Thank you.